The fantasy about Morocco is as this oriental opulence, right? Yes. So going to a place where there's going to be 2 petals on a table when you could have a bouquet of 80 roses makes no sense for me, because what we are about is expressing the wealth of feelings and colors and scents. So it's all about opulence in this country,
I recently returned from teaching a workshop at an extraordinary boutique retreat center on the outskirts of Marrakesh. It is called Jnane Tamsna. Experiencing this place reminds me of 2 core ideas I teach artists to help make their art and frankly their life stronger. Number 1, surround yourself with what brings you alive. Number 2, never stop believing that whatever you can dream, more than likely is possible. How can a particular place do this? How is it possible that experiencing the new feelings, colors, and scents of this place inspire? How can the creative vision of one inspire so many? Today I'm in conversation with the visionary designer and hotelier Meryanne Loum Martin. She has redefined luxury not in the usual financial way, but in terms of exactly what money can't buy: soul. She overcame and ignored prevalent racial and sexual prejudices and created Morocco's first lifestyle brand hotel. Today, Meryanne and the places she creates are legendary. Icons of fashion and design, as well as celebrities of film, dance, and music, all come to experience her contemporary, gorgeous lifestyle aesthetic. Her refined design sense, philosophy, and deep respect for Moroccan culture are all intertwined in a cosmopolitan approach to living in art, now known worldwide as simply Moroccan Style. Images and links of Jnane Tamsna and Meryanne's recent coffee table book, Inside Marrakesh, can be found by going to art2life.com and clicking on podcasts. Also, for all those interested in truly learning how to use color in their art, download my free Color Tips PDF by going to colortipspdf.com. This color information could change every piece of art you make moving forward. Okay, join Meryanne and me for this conversation about differences, mindset, and soulful opulence. We sit together amongst Moroccan antiquities, contemporary art, and fresh-cut roses at her Moroccan destination, Jnane Tamsna. Welcome to Art2Life, a podcast for the creatively curious. My name is Nicholas Wilton, and each week I'll help you rediscover not just the art of your life, but the art in your life. Join me as we explore that perfect blue at twilight, the wild frontiers of art making, and the extraordinary joy of finding your way as you go. I'm walking on the 10-acre retreat center called Jnane Tamsna. The owner, Meryanne, I've been told that her home is down this path. And I just thought I'd start describing this beautiful place that her and her partner have created over the last 20 years. There's candles, lanterns everywhere, hung up in the olive trees, bougainvillea, incredible gardens, figs, olives, and there's, even though it's dry here in Morocco, it's a sort of reddish earth color everywhere. It's so lush because of they irrigate it here. They've got this system of watering and I don't totally understand it, but it has to do with the use of ceramic pots. As I'm walking by this garden right now, and it looks like there's lids, pots that are half buried, and the idea is that you fill these with water and you put the lids on, and slowly over days, weeks, that water permeates the soil. Anyway, it's an oasis. It's an oasis of creativity, a visionary artist that I'm really excited to share with you. Miriam's amazing, and I'm now coming up to the house, so It's this beautiful house. Oh my God. Huge, tall doors, gorgeous sculptures out front. Okay, I'm going to go in and we're going to set up for this interview. Okay, hang on. Okay, so Meryanne, thank you so much for taking time this afternoon to sit down and have this conversation.
Well, Nick, it's really a pleasure. We just enjoyed having this incredible group you brought here. And, you know, I'm a total accidental hotelier. And when I see that, I understand this is why I'm doing this. Because I couldn't care less about being someone whose job was about selling room nights. Yes. But creating a space where people feel happy and inspired and the best out of their own creativity comes out is something which is a very blissful achievement, I would say.
Yes, and I seek out places, just so you know, in the world. I didn't understand it at the time, but there's certain places that people feel more alive than others, and that makes the job of teaching people and inspiring them that much easier. And I want to dive into that, like what you're doing here visually and aesthetically, and the feeling of this as a home, but in this foreign land. It's so different. Morocco's so different for everyone who comes here, but they just settle in. And that must be so gratifying to see that.
Yeah, it is extremely gratifying to be living in a country with so many layers of culture, a city which is at the crossroad of so many histories, personal histories, national histories, so many cultures in general, you know, and then to understand that you are going to have your little part into this incredible tapestry of diversity that is Marrakesh.
Yes, yes. And take us back a little. You are the living embodiment of diversity in terms of all, you know, growing up. You born in Africa, you lived in Moscow for a period, yeah, in London, and ended up in Paris.
And I traveled a lot.
Yes.
Well, Paris is home.
Paris is home. Okay.
Home. But we didn't live home until I was 13. And in fact, you know, very often I'm asked, how come? You know, and I think that when we were living in Moscow, I was 7. So from the age of 7 to 10, under hard communist era, where, you know, Khrushchev at first and then Brezhnev, and the cultural life was totally controlled, you know. And because I had this incredible mother who would tell me every morning for 3 years, open your eyes, open your ears, and remember everything. Because she had this feeling that this experience would be a powerful tool to become a different person. Because all of the children, diplomat kids, were living in a bubble. They could have been anywhere in the world. And she wanted me to take the maximum of this incredible experience. So during the day, I was in an international school, French school. But on weekends, she had put me in the Communist Youth Center.
Oh my God.
Where I was, of course, the only black kid. And I had the uniform. And I had, you know, the uniform of young communists.
God.
And I was taking classes of balalaika, you know, because it's a cultural center for all the kids there. And I had the brooch with Lenin, Marx, and Engels. And so I had these two very different lives, where at home it was free. And I understood that these people were living under the, how do you call this when you're like that?
Oppression.
Total. And so one thing which was very kind of a key for me to understand, in fact, you can live different life and you have a way to conform in appearance but still be free inside, was that I had a piano teacher. So twice a week, my mother would take me to my piano teacher. And you know, the Russian people were not allowed to listen to foreign music. They were only allowed to listen to classical music, Russian popular music, and Cuban music, because Cuba is communist. But, you know, the Russians, I mean, salsa music is not really their culture. And so every time I would arrive at my piano teacher, salsa music was blasting through the neighborhood because she opened her windows and it was blasting everywhere. And then my mother would take me to the floor of the apartment, and the piano teacher and her would giggle for 5 minutes before we would start the class. And at some point I asked my mother, what's so funny? And then she told me, well, it is because she's listening to Puerto Rican music and the communists cannot see the difference. And this is when, so I was 7, and then my mother explained to me, this is what is called cultural freedom, that we all benefit in the Western world, but it's her way of having some oxygen in her life, because in appearance she's conforming, but in reality she's free. So from the age of 7, this is how my mind was structured, that there are always layers of things, and that in the meantime, I was going to the Bolshoi. By the age of 10, I had been more times than one's lifetime to the Bolshoi, and I had seen all of Tchaikovsky possible, and
oh my God,
all the operas, because this is what was allowed to do. So we would do everything, but at the same time, we would have our own freedom. So I think that when people ask me, why are you different? I think these experiences have structured me in a different way. On top of course, the diversity that we have in the family, then experiences like this have just leveraged everything.
And you talked about, generational, the slavery in your background, the need and the importance of freedom.
Yes.
It's taken away. I mean, if you have that legacy in your family, this is not something that you just take for granted. And
I don't take anything for granted. And the thing is that the other day I was speaking with guests who were saying that from what they knew about my family, my ancestors and me, they had the feeling that at all generations we always thought everything is possible. And it's the case, my ancestor who was sitting in the French Congress and who was a lawyer, his father was born enslaved, and he never thought, I can't do that. And his son was a surgeon. I told you his story yesterday, and he never thought, why wouldn't I be able to go to the best medicine school of France? And you see, so there was always a sense, it's up to you. And it is up to you. Well, of course, sometimes it's not like a fairy tale. It's
right.
Hard work.
Yeah, you talked about that.
It's hard work.
Yeah.
But it is very important to think that things are possible. And you see, for example, when I was a lawyer in Paris, and I had just won a quite prestigious award. And when I decided to come more and more in Marrakesh, my friends in Paris were telling me, are you nuts? Do you know who would dream to win this award? And you're thinking about building in Marrakesh and doing a business there. You want to be an innkeeper when you could be this Parisian lawyer,
Yeah.
And
an innkeeper.
Well, I was saying, there's more creativity in being an innkeeper there. It's more gratifying for me than continuing being a Parisian lawyer. But it's interesting because, in fact, it's all about how you see yourself.
Yes.
And a lot of people put limits to themselves. And this is the same thing about creativity. I think that there are a lot of people who have a creative side to themselves, but they believe they're not talented. But it's not the idea of... The purpose is not having talent. The purpose is, expressing what is inside of you. Yes. And finding channels to express it, and also finding ways to trigger your creativity.
Yes. And this idea, of being an innkeeper in Marrakesh, I mean, you were the first luxury hotel or lifestyle hotel ever here, and you were a woman, and all of those things. And this is far from. This wasn't a huge expression of your creativity. This place is extraordinarily beautiful and inspiring, and I can't. Every time I go around a corner, I see something that it just energizes me. And so, how were you so confident to know what was possible? Or is it just you were creative and you couldn't express it and you were frustrated? I mean,
I always had a very social life, and since I was a child or a teenager or then a young adult, people always loved the parties and coming to my place. Yes. I knew that my parties were different. And so I thought when I came to this country, I could host differently.
It's hospitality, isn't it?
There's such an incredible wealth of culture here. But the problem about hospitality in most countries is that it's done by investors. And they just look at the numbers. They just look at what each square meter is going to yield in terms of profit. Yes. And it's a different business. So they're fabulous maybe at creating hotels for big conferences. But when you're in a country with such incredible culture, you need to do human scale things so people can be connected to the culture. And this is how we were different, because I came here, I had fabulous trips in Latin America and India. I had really traveled the world before I came to Marrakesh the first time. And I travel in a different way also at others, because very often I would travel alone. And
really?
I love traveling alone. And I would meet extraordinary people. And the people I would meet on trips have had an incredible importance on my life, because they opened other ways of thinking. They triggered creativity in some fields. I know that if I had not traveled alone in India in '84, I would never have thought Marrakesh the same way when I came a year later. And I understood how important hospitality could be in India, because I stayed in some places where the owners had turned a family house into an amazing business. And I was so happy there that I said, in fact, this is what it is about, is being able to get in history, being able to understand what it was about.
What your surroundings are, and then curate experience for people to come in new, who then can have that experience.
Exactly. And so Marrakesh is the perfect grounds for that, because it is a crossroad.
When I first came here, I didn't know you, and I just heard of you a little bit, and I don't know if we had much time, but I described this place and the dinners we had for the year before I came back, over COVID, and it's been a couple of years, but this idea of that there's candles. For those of you guys listening, you've got to go to art2life.com and click on podcasts and look at those photographs. These dinners and these places where Meryanne sets up for people to meet are so beautiful, and you're using candles, hundreds of candles, which we never think to do. I mean, these meals are so beautiful, and I'm just curious, that just seems a hallmark of, I'm always saying that, well, it's like she's hanging candles all the time. It's all in the trees, it's on the tables, and it's just so beautiful. And there's, you would not get that in a hotel, but I mean, we rarely do that for ourselves. I mean, maybe at a wedding, but it's interesting how I walk through the hotel and there's fresh roses all the time. I mean, this is just something that you don't skimp on at all. You're just flooding it all the time. There's such an abundance here of that. And I know you're doing it because you love it, but loving yourself is part of this, right? Just what you believe in and what brings you alive. And then you're just sharing that.
I think that we don't count our pennies when it comes to the experience we want to share with guests. The fantasy about Morocco is as this oriental opulence, right? Yes. So going to a place where there's going to be 2 petals on a table when you could have a bouquet of 80 roses makes no sense for me, because what we are about is expressing the wealth of, feelings and colors and scents. So it's all about opulence in this country, So I find it normal to have like 800 candles and 2,000 roses for a dinner. because it's about living a Moroccan experience.
But this is such a richness. I mean, it relates. I teach these workshops, teaching one last week, and people don't put out a lot of paint. It's very skimpy. I mean, there's just this, it's interesting, you know, and I have to say, you guys, the paint's included, and there's a richness and a generosity that you give to yourself, and then that turns into something you can give to other people. I just think it's really interesting that how you've carried that through, and it's felt everywhere in the generosity of the staff. And I love how behind an organization, there's usually a person, this is you, that everything is mirrored. All of that filters down and comes out, you know, it's just beautiful.
My dream would be to attend one of your seminar workshops.
Oh, yeah. Well, you have to do that.
Yeah, I have to find the time to take away everything I have to do.
You would
so
love
I can follow. Because, you know, I know that it's I heard it from the French guests who were absolutely in admiration of everything they could hear. And they were telling me there was such fabulous energy coming out of this space.
Yes.
And I would love to follow that, because what is great is that you don't need to be figurative. You don't need to draw perfectly. No. Mm-hmm.
We're not really doing an art course, it turns out. You know, people come for the art, but they stay for the connection. And it's life force. It's bringing your energy forward. It's how you're living. It's that embodiment of what you believe in and you care about, and you share that and you put it forward. And that's tricky to do, but it's powerful. And what I think is so interesting is that it attracts, it's magnetic, right? You know, I know that this place, you've talked about all the movie stars and all the people, and it's blowing up here because everyone's coming. They're coming to experience that energy, you know? And then we see the same thing. I mean, that's what people crave, to feel more themselves.
Exactly.
And to see an example of it. And how can I live in a way that is more juiced and energetic and really that I could actually be this way, you know?
Yes. Yeah, it's amazing. I could see the people were radiant. Their face were expressing happiness. And it is probably because so many of them may not paint all the time. You know, and to find something so gratifying, so beautiful, so, you know, and doing it for a whole week. It's really interesting to see how people arrived.
Right.
And when they leave.
Yes.
They felt happy.
Yes.
You know, just if they had gone to the best wellness week, you know.
Yeah. I mean, we all want to be seen for actually who we are. If we could be comfortable enough in our own skin, and they're doing that. You know, the artwork is just a metaphor for themselves, and they can work on these things and they can sort themselves out. The artwork is the tool they're using to become themselves. And you're in a similar world. I mean, you're doing the same kind of thing. People come here, and I think you were saying how you have guests come and they go out into the city and the souk, and then they call for a cab home.
Yes, exactly.
And they just arrived. And this place is totally unlike anything where any of them live. It's so different, but it's so home, you know?
Yeah. And nothing pleases us more than when people feel like this, you know? Let's go back home. And also when people tell us, if I had a place in Morocco, it would be looking like one of your rooms. It wouldn't be as big because it's not a hotel, but it would be like... And this is where I really feel that we hit it right. It was a very risky challenge, you know, but this is when I feel we hit it right. And also the fact that people leave with a sentiment that it has been like a transformative experience.
Yes. Yeah. Can you describe, you know, because this is aesthetic, but it's the feeling, it's all what you put in. You were saying that the social, the parties that you put on years ago in Paris or whatever had a different flavor. You noticed people would say this. What is it? Can you put words to what you're doing? I mean,
you know what? I'm just going to give you an example.
Okay.
I was living in New York, in a tiny one-bedroom and having not a big salary. But I would still host dinner parties of like 8-10 people. And it looked totally different from the dinner parties of my very wealthy friends I was living in Chelsea and who would live, let's say, Upper East Side in gorgeous big apartments. But my parties were really nice because there were candles on the table. We would order, I was broke, but the food was excellent because everybody would have the menus like you do in the US, and we would order, let's say, Indian food. But when it would arrive, I would put it in nice plates. And the table would be set with something I had found vintage in some flea market. But the tablecloth looked gorgeous. And I had brought back from my place in Paris a few prints, a few things. The place looked extremely sophisticated. And it had cost me nothing. So it's just a matter of the eyes. You need to have an eye, and whether you're able to spend $20 or something, or $2,000 or something, maybe the $20 is just going to look like if it was $2,000 because it's put together. And there were flowers and there were candles. And I remember sometimes my mother was telling me, so, but how much you make? And you're still having these parties at home? What do you give? Pasta? And I said, no, Mama, my dinners are as sophisticated as if I was in Paris.
Wow.
But we all share the cost. But I put it in a way that looks very grand with peanuts, And I'll give you an example of how, I think, so since I was in Moscow, my eyes opened all the time.
And you left that, you said, how old were you when you left?
From the age of 7 to 10.
Wow.
And so, imagine if you are told every day, open your eyes, open your ears, remember everything. So it means that my eyes are always opened. And when I was building this house, I drew everything myself, and then I gave I do all the architecture plan, everything, and I gave it to an architect for him to put his stamp and to put it into the formal thing for planning consent. And when I came to see the land, I could immediately see the place. Palm trees were going to decide. I had a map down of the trees, and then I slid the architecture between the palm trees.
Because there was like 700 palm trees here?
600.
600 on this land. And how many hectares?
The hotel is on 9 acres.
9 acres, okay.
And so it's quite interesting when, everything came very spontaneously and very fast. I arrived on that side, and there was a palm tree in the courtyard, and there was a tree on the other side, and I measured the distance between the trees, and I said, okay, the house is going to be, the symmetry will be decided because of that.
The trees.
Yes. And then everything went. It was just like the land was so inspiring that I did not hesitate. It was just like totally spontaneous.
Wow.
And then this room where we're sitting in, I knew I wanted high ceilings. And I knew I wanted this, how do you call this in English? Something below the ceiling. In France we say, what? Crown molding.
Yeah, but it's a relief along the foot down.
But it's something that you have
between
at the top of the walls
and
at the just below the ceiling. And because of the space, I wanted something to have a good scale. I couldn't do a little thing, which would look totally ridiculous.
It's too small, right.
And this took me as much time as drawing the whole property, and also this fireplace. And I was so frustrated thinking, how come I'm stuck in a detail for weeks when in 1 week I had drawn everything? So we were finishing this house, and I was just feeling, you're such an idiot. How come you can't find that? And I'm walking in the Medina, mumbling up to myself, and there was a little cart in front of me, a donkey, a man with a cart, and there was an old oven, which was probably going to be discarded somewhere. And I'm just there, and I look at the oven, and then I had a flash.
No.
The door of the oven was in tiny, like 3 centimeters width. And I saw this little border, and I said, of course, this is what is going to look great in a different scale. And I came back and I called the plaster guy. I said, let's make a sample immediately. And I got my thing. But just because I was looking.
Yes.
Otherwise, we might still have, I don't know what here. But I was very frustrated with everything I was trying until this became the obvious shape.
Wow.
And it was a very old oven going probably to be, discarded somewhere.
You told a story, and I'd love to touch on it again of, you had the name, you had this idea, you had a name of this place years before you found this place.
Yes.
And how you found this place and with the name. And can you just touch on that? Because I think that's...
Yeah, so in fact, it's interesting because you have to believe that some things are written, when...
Well, this is what I'm getting at.
Yes,
I want to talk to you about this. Yeah. This synchronicity.
Yeah.
That there's certain ways of being, I believe, when you're in yourself, when you are in a higher frequency, energy, consciousness, openness, that things cross your path that are helpful.
Yes.
The horse, the donkey with this thing. And this naming of this place and all of that. And I'm just curious if you're aware of that too.
Yeah, it's really something which was meant to be, I would say,
But it was meant to be for you. It was for you to bring this.
Yes, for sure. So, in fact, Tamsna is the name of the village not far. And this is where I did my first house in Marrakesh, which really put me on the map of boutique hospitality. And I opened in 1989. And
now
it was called
Art
Tamsna.
Italy, blew up. Pre-internet.
It was before internet, before digital power, and people were reading magazines, buying magazines and reading magazines, and this property appeared from Architectural Digest to everything, everywhere. So I was known as Tamsna because it was Dar Tamsna. And then I did...
people called you that?
Yeah, on the street people would say, oh, this is Mrs. Tamsna. It became... There was the name of the property, but it also became my identity in a way,
Because you became sort of famous, really.
Yes.
And celebrities started coming and all
Tons of them. And in France, we had the top CEOs because someone who was very influential in the media in France fell in love with the property and invited his best clients. And then they were all top CEOs. And then they started inviting their best clients. So the French people were just like top CEOs, famous top CEOs in France, coming either with their family or with the clients, and the clients coming with more clients. That was the French part. And then we had a lot of European royals, and since they're all cousins, they would tell their cousins. And then we had a lot of Hollywood celebrities, and they know each other. And then we had a lot of fashion stars, Donna Karan, Giorgio Armani, the Missonis, all these people would come.
Oh my God. So for the visuals, the aesthetic, the design.
Well, it was a matter that the lifestyle was beautiful and the house was beautiful. And the house was as often used for fashion shoots than it was for stays. And Peter Lindbergh, the late photographer, had some iconic photos done there. And all of this, it was just like, when you have the perfect storm, but a perfect positive storm.
Yes.
So Tamsna became my identity. And then I did a place called Riyadh Tamsna, which was in the Medina. And it was a concept store, and it opened in 1999, and it was also something totally innovative. And I keep on bumping into people telling me, oh, I used to come to Marrakesh, and I would never leave without going to Riyadh Tamsna, because they were always the most interesting things to do or see. So then there was Dar Tamsna, Riyadh Tamsna. And then with my husband, we decided we should consider doing a hotel. And since he is obsessed with gardens, and Jnane means Garden of Paradise,
okay.
we said one day we'll have a land and we'll call it Jnane Tamsna, because Tamsna was my identity and Jnane meant Garden of Paradise.
And he's an ethnobotanist?
He's an ethnobotanist and an anthropologist.
Good,
yes.
Perfect.
So, it was just like we would speak about one day we'll have a land and we'll call it Jnane Tamsna for 2 years. And then we started looking for land. And after seeing tons of land, none of them were the right ones. I bumped into this land where immediately when I walked, I felt different, It was covered with palm trees and it was a beautiful piece of land. And it's very different from all the other land because it's not flat, where in most of the Palmeraie, everything is flat. So this one has an interesting topography. It's covered with palm trees, and I just felt mesmerized by the place. And so when my husband came back from a trip, I took him here, and he also loved the place. So here I go to buy the land, and we are so happy. At least after 2 years of looking, we have found the land of our dreams, and we will call it Garden of Paradise Tamsna, Jnane Tamsna. And when I went to sign for the land at the deeds office, I was asked, "How are you going to call your land?" And I said, Jnane Tamsna. And the guy looked at me a little bit like impatient. And he said, "No, this is not what I'm asking you. I'm asking you how you are going to call it." And I repeated, Jnane Tamsna. And he looks at me in disbelief and he said, "Oh, you don't know that this has been the name of the land forever?" So I was under the shock. I had goosebumps, and it really made me realize that this was the land for us. Because before knowing it, we were dreaming of a land called like that,
Wow.
So here we are in Jnane Tamsna, and when people tell me, "Oh, your hotel is nice, but the name is impossible to pronounce," I say, well, there's nothing I can do about that,
Right. You put different things together, your aesthetic, your design, everything, and style is a tricky thing for artists, and they talk a lot about, what's my style and finding myself, and you've talked about style a lot, lifestyle, and you are putting things together that don't go together. Your style is what you create, and can you talk about just your aesthetic a little? I mean, I know I'm just simplifying it, but there's a daringness, there's boldness. You're surrounded, and I know this as an artist, with people who expect things to be done a certain way. Like how where do you get that creative confidence, or is it just a product of, well, this is just an expression of myself, and I just have to keep true to that, and because it's daring, but it's relaxing at the same time, and everyone relates to it. But no one's standing there. It's so purely you, this place. Do you know what I mean?
All the places I did were purely me, even if I had no money. Because, as I told you, when I was in New York, I had gone to a flea market. I had the nicest chest of all the apartments, and I had bought it $80 at the Salvation Army. And people were just, "Oh my God, where did you find that?"
But it's what you put next to it, and all of that.
And the thing itself. But you see, it's interesting because you said you put together things that don't go together. Now, who are we to decide that things don't go together?
Yes, right. But they go together because it's
of
your
the whole
aesthetic.
Mix.
Yes.
Yeah, because of the whole mix. And I think that it's all about being daring, daring and not consider. And it's also about what is impossible. The concept of what is possible and what is impossible is something that varies. But I always thought that, because of the very unique history of so many of my ancestors, the concept of what is possible, what is expected, what is impossible is something which vary from people to people,
It's born within them, or what? I mean, this is what I don't understand. Why some people, their gaze is broader and there's more possibility, and others are, obviously we get influenced by people, and that's what inspiration is. That's why people are listening today, because when they see it, they can imagine it,
Yes,
when
but
they see it done, but a visionary creates something that hasn't.
But a visionary imagines first and sees it in his mind. And this is where the difference comes. And I remember that at the beginning, when we opened this hotel, a friend of mine who is an advisor to business people in France called and said she wanted to book the place to do a seminar on the question of possible and impossible. So the story was, it was very famous, chain stores in France, and they had set objectives to each director of a store, big stores, which had put them quite depressed because they thought that the objectives were impossible to reach. And she was an advisor to the CEO, and he was saying, I have a human resource issue here because we believed that each of the store could reach that, and it just came like a banging on a hammer on their head.
Yeah.
They're all totally depressed. What do you think we should do? And she told them, well, what about a seminar at my friend's place, and we bring a philosophy professor who's a specialist of what is possible, what is impossible. And it was fascinating talking about a transformative experience, because through this seminar, every morning they would have conversation with this professor, and they realized that it's yourself setting the limits of what is possible and impossible. And it is exactly what is happening in everyone's life. You meet people who think, oh, I would have so much love to do this, but this is out of my reach. They have put the limits on themselves without trying. And I think it's the same thing with creativity very often, because you have people, I'm thinking, for example, about a French politician who's quite famous, but we've known him since he was a kid, and his parents were friends of my parents. And his father was a surgeon, and he was passionate about theater. And he couldn't be an actor because, of course, in the generation, you had to study, medicine, law, being an engineer.
Those categories.
So he was a very successful doctor in Paris. And as soon as he retired, he started acting. He's on stage. He's in theaters in Paris. And most people, he's not a star, but he's a professional actor, and most people don't know that he was a brilliant doctor before, and they just think he's an aging actor. And I think this is extraordinary because he never thought this is impossible.
Yes.
When so many people, so he was doing this a little bit on the side as a hobby, but when most people would think, I can live off my pension.
Yeah.
He has the most.
Or postpone this to another time.
And this is what I like, is when people don't think that things are impossible.
Yes. We talk a lot about this in this art workshop that we just had. And, one of the beliefs or challenges for people who want to live more expressively or more artfully is that they just do not have time. They're just trying to get by, and maybe one day they can do this, but really participating even in a little bit. If you want to create a zoo, for example, obviously that's going to take a lot of money, and maybe that's not available right now, but you could start a scrapbook of all the animals you would have in the zoo, and it's the same feeling, right? You get the same lift. You get energized from that. You were inspiring yourself and your friends in New York City, and you had no money. And I think there's a connection between doing that and where we're sitting today. I mean, you just took off, and the scale of how but you're doing the same thing. It helps you get there. Yeah. And I think this is true. And I think it's really hopeful that we can experience right now our dreams.
Yes, it's
right?
a way of thinking.
It's a way of thinking. It is possible. Feel it. Look at these animals. Cut them out of a magazine. Talk to someone who has a zoo. You're living it. Yeah. And then things happen, because when you're energized, as you are, look what comes. Because you're inspired and your energy's higher. That's a big part of what we teach. And then people start becoming more and more artful, and suddenly they're making art, and they change their lives. It was just this sort of like hope, and they come to some workshop for 3 days and get away from the kids, and they realize what's possible. So exactly. I love this what's possible idea.
Yes, because you see, I'm sure that people who have attended your workshop, it will have impact trickling down on all sorts of fields of their life.
Yes.
Just even like food. I'm going to give you an example. Just like food, people say, I don't know how to cook. Well, there's nothing easier than mixing ingredients. But I'm very lucky because I can imagine what it's going to taste. And you saw my book on Marrakesh. But before, I was a contributing editor on another book, 18 years ago. And I was in charge of some part which had to do with food, and also some part which has to do with design and style. And I remember sometimes I would get an email and they would tell me, oh, we're late, we need 3 recipes by tomorrow morning. And I would just sit at my computer and write the recipes. And my husband would tell me, "What are you doing?" And I said, "I'm writing recipes." He said, "Have you tasted it first?" I said, "No, but I know it's going to be delicious." And he would, because he's a scientist and an academic, he would become enraged and tell me, "This is going to be printed. Are you crazy? You're writing a recipe you haven't even tried."
I just love that.
And I said, "Oh, I'll try tomorrow,"
Right.
But in the meantime, it had gone to be printed. And it is true that you have to have confidence, but it doesn't mean that you're doing nonsense.
Right.
It's very rational.
Yes.
And I think it's the same thing. What you are doing is opening ways for people to think differently.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And this starts with what they do themselves, and I'm sure that it gives them a lot of confidence for doing other things. Like, for example, when I was living in New York, I had a very social life, and people thought I was super elegant, but I had found some vintage shops where I could buy the most spectacular dresses for $20 or $30. And I remember one day a girl who was like very spoiled by her family, a French girl, and she was going out a lot, but she only had designer's clothes. One day she told me, "I thought you had a little job. How can you be so elegant?" And,
right.
And I told her, "Well, you have to be creative, my dear." And then it's true that, and I heard about another girl who was not wanting to go out as often as we did because her wardrobe was really bad. And I said, "She's stupid. She's cutting herself from so much fun for nonsense because she could spend $30 and but they didn't think that they could go to a vintage shop."
And people equate luxury with price.
Yes, which is the most ridiculous thing.
Yes, but this is how people think of it, that and it's so unimaginative.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. But these people like this would need to go to your seminars, because then they learn how to think differently. I think it's just a matter of thinking differently.
Yes, and I think something happens to a person when they make things.
Yeah.
And my children went to this little private school because the local school wasn't so good, and most of the parents, and it was a lot, kindergarten, it was most people just go to the local one. We went to this private one for various reasons and spent a lot, and most of our children's friends were investment bankers, and we'd go to these parties in these big homes that were luxury, but boring luxury.
Yeah, exactly.
Store-bought, everything's store-bought. You get to go to the mall and see a preview of the person's home. It is impressive when someone spends all this money, but I never felt intimidated because I was like, what do you make? For the currency for me is, what are people creating? And, and it was interesting. We were such an anomaly. We were like artists and didn't have a lot of money, but I never felt impoverished. I felt quite the opposite.
Absolutely. Because, I think that probably the ultimate luxury is exactly what money cannot buy.
Yeah.
Exactly. Because, everything that money can buy can be bought by Mr. Smith, Jones, or Martin. And so what? So some people have had the opportunity to make much more and be able to buy a dining room table at $40,000 a table when someone can only buy one at $400. But at the end of the day, there's nothing more anonymous than money.
Yes.
Money has no soul,
Yes.
So in fact, what is rare is luxury, and what is rare is really what money cannot buy.
Could you just speak a little bit about, I know that many visitors come here, all the movie stars, but also just people on vacation and different kinds of people. How do you think about, and with those people come the trappings of wealth and all that. How do you think about relationships? And you're so connected, and I know you put so much work into that and you value that so much. It's the people who you're serving and what the experiences you're creating for people, but how do you sort all that?
Well, I think because our place never competed with classical luxury. We're not into the norm. We're a very organically grown place we want to live, and we share it with people. It filters the expectations of people coming here. If they are coming back, heard about the place from friends, And the people coming here, what they have more in common than having the same type of bank account. So they like gardens, they like natural living, they like organic food, they like the fact that the house is so, all the decor is so, I would say, bohemian or layers of life and so many personal belongings and books everywhere.
And there's history.
Yeah.
There's
so
a patina.
I think that this is what is the common, what people have in common. And one day I was just watching at conversations going around the pool, and I felt we must have done something right. Because there was a guest who's a friend that we've known her for ages, who is beyond wealth, inherited tons from each member of her family. And no one knows, well, we've known her since we were teenagers, so no one knows who she is and how much she weighs. But she was just there by the pool, chatting with an elder couple who were retired, and I believe that they probably are the type to save for 2 or 3 years to go on holidays. And they bonded, and they were both here for a week, and they would go out, and they would have, they would do things together. And I thought, how wonderful is that this place, and they were both all crazy about gardens. How wonderful to have created a place which erases social boundaries. Because in normal life, they would never meet each other. Never. It's impossible. The circles she's in.
Yes, right.
And the life this couple had, it was not. And here, suddenly, there's no one knows who is,
Yes. And everyone can feel comfortable. That's the beauty of it.
Exactly. And everyone's... we're developing more and more retreats here because this is what we love doing. And we are doing writers' retreats more and more. So we had the poetry one 2 weeks ago, and we're doing a big writers' retreat in January, and we hope to do more and more, and we have a few in the pipeline. And the woman I partnered to do these writing retreats, she has found a name. She came here on holidays, and we started chatting, and immediately we realized that we could do tons of things together. But she had come on holidays, and she was starting her publishing house. And when she saw the house and all the books and everything, and let's talk. And then we decided to work together. And she has found a Greek name to give an identity to our retreats, which are going to be called Philoxenia. And Philoxenia means a space where people arrive as strangers and leave as friends.
Oh.
And I think it's really, if we were not called Jnane Tamsna, maybe we would dream, Philoxenia for the next property,
beautiful.
Yes. And when I was in Paris, when was I in Paris? About 3 weeks ago, I saw an old friend of mine who's a philosophy professor and who studied Greek. And when I told him, we're going to start these retreats and they're going to be called Philoxenia, he knew, of course, what it meant. And he had such a smile on his face. And he told me, you know what it means, right? And I thought, it's so cool because this word is really embodying everything that we are about,
And even the sound of the word, if you don't know the meaning, has the feeling in it.
Yeah, it's positive.
Right. Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, that's so beautiful. Meryanne, thank you so much for sharing this with us. And for all those of you guys listening, you really must, this is a visual conversation. So please hop on over to art2life.com. Click on podcasts. There's links to Meryanne's extraordinary book. I believe it's called Morocco.
It's called Inside Marrakesh.
Inside Marrakesh, I'm sorry, yes.
Enchanting Homes and Gardens.
Yes. And that's, I was curious. I just want to touch on this because I thought it was amazing. I looked through it. These are some of the homes here that you know a lot of these people, correct?
I know all of them except one.
Yes, and you had your photographer shoot them, and they're extraordinary. It's just beautiful.
Well, the book, I wanted to create to pay tribute to this extraordinary city of Marrakesh. I'm fortunate to call home because I don't know in how many places in the world you can live in a country which has such a strong culture and intertwine it with your own cultural heritage to create your own Moroccan style. And this is what the book is about. This is why I chose to have only foreigners' house, except one house which belongs to Moroccan painter Mahi Bin Bin, who is very cosmopolitan and shown in many places. And for the gardens, the same thing. It belongs to foreigners, except one also belonging to a Moroccan painter who shows a lot in the US. So I wanted to show the cosmopolitan approach of Marrakesh and how it could still be totally Moroccan and so diverse, because not one house looks like the other. And this was the purpose of the book,
you know? Yes, which is what you've done.
Yes, but it's, you know, so all the houses are different, but they all belong to foreigners in love with Morocco.
Beautiful. Well, there's links to that, you guys, if you hop on over to the show notes. Again, thank you so much. This was just lovely.
Well, I can't wait for you to bring back another wonderful group.
We are. We're coming back in 12 months with a lot more people. So. Awesome.
Thank you so much for asking me to do this.
Yes, my pleasure.
Hey, thanks for listening to the Art2Life show. If you enjoyed the podcast, please help me get the word out by sharing it with your friends on Instagram at Art2Life_world. The recording of this and all episodes, along with a place to leave comments, see additional photos, and discover a whole new approach to making art, can be found by going to Art2Lifepodcast.com. And secondly, if you could leave a rating and review in whatever app you're listening on today, I would super appreciate it. It makes a big difference. And last but not least, before you go, if you'd like to be on my artist list, every Sunday morning I send out a video blog all about art making. Go to Art2Lifepodcast.com to sign up. And all these links are in the show notes, of course. Thanks so much for being here, and we'll see you next week.